Hi, all Inderes TV viewers. Today in the interview, I have PYN Elite's Lan Nguyen, who will give us an update on how PYN Elite and also in general the Vietnam stock market is doing since we last talked. Hi, Lan, and welcome to the interview.
Hi, Sarah. This is Lan from PYN Elite Fund, and it's so nice to talk to you again today because it has been 1 year since the last time I appeared on Inderes TV 1 year ago, and time flies so fast. But we have a good year this year.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And likewise, it's really nice to talk to you again. And it was a long time overdue because, like you said, it's been a year since we last
Yeah.
talked with you. But hey, let's get started with the first question, and it's already a rather big one. Let's dive into the US
Okay.
presidential election. So Trump's election win was followed by emerging stock market dropping to levels last seen in mid-September. What kind of direct or maybe indirect effects do you see Trump's presidency and also the more protectionist US policy and potential fiscal loosening having on Vietnam's economy?
Thank you for the interesting question, Sarah. It's true that Trump has a protectionist trade stance, and Vietnam ranks fourth among the countries with the largest trade surplus with the US. And Vietnam is a very open economy, in which the foreign trade accounts for a large part of our GDP. So that's a very valid concern. However, I have a more optimistic view on this matter. I believe the likelihood of Vietnam facing severe trade sanctions is not as high as someone might think, and the impact may not be as negative as people might think. And here's my point. First, Vietnam holds a strategically important geopolitical position in Southeast Asia. It shares both maritime and land borders with China, and there are good reasons why the U.S. has established comprehensive strategic partnership with Vietnam, while its relationship with China is more like strategic competition rather than a partnership. So having a strategic partnership with Vietnam places the US in a significantly influential geopolitical position in Asia, and that is a substantial advantage that I think Trump would not be wise to sacrifice for a trade war with Vietnam. My second point is I think Vietnamese leaders are masters of diplomacy, and I believe they will know how to maintain good relations with the US to significantly minimize the risk of a trade war and the risk of increased tariffs from Vietnamese goods. For example, by increasing the purchase of LNG, weapons, and aircrafts are the things that Vietnam can do to address the issue in the relation with US. The third point is in the worst case scenario where Trump decided to address the trade deficit with Vietnam by increasing the tariffs, I think the tariff increase on Vietnamese goods will be significantly lower than the tariffs they apply on Chinese goods. And that would still place Vietnam at a certain advantage over China in the competition for market share and in terms of export to the US. Now, I would like to say two interesting pieces of information. First is the Trump organization has announced in September this year that they plan to invest 1.5 billion US dollar to develop a hotel and golf complex in Vietnam through a partnership with a local firm. Second piece of information is around the same time, SpaceX by Elon Musk also plans to invest 1.5 billion US dollar into Vietnam in the upcoming time. So the exact details are not yet specified at the moment, but I would assume that Mr. Trump would not want to impose trade sanctions on a country that he and Elon Musk are planning to invest in. So that was my view.
Yeah, thanks. Those were really interesting points, and it's good to hear this kind of more optimistic view on the
Yeah.
topics. Good. Well, next let's talk about Vietnam's dong. It was weakened again in the end of autumn in relation to dollar, and dong has lost value compared to the beginning of the year. So what have been the drivers causing this trend, and what can we expect happening in the future?
It's true that the Vietnam dong has depreciated against the US dollar since the end of September, but I think that was mainly due to the strong rise in the US dollar index, especially following Trump's win in the election. So I think this is a common issue affecting most of the countries, not just Vietnam. However, if you look closely, you will see that the Vietnam dong has depreciated by 3.5% the US dollar since September, which is significantly lower than 6.7% increase in the US dollar index in the same period. And I witnessed that many other currencies in the region have depreciated a lot more than the VND during this period. On a year-to-date basis, the VND has depreciated by 4.6% compared to 6.2% increase in the US dollar index, which I think is not too bad and not bad at all compared to the year-to-date performance of many other regional currencies. And additionally, if you look closely, the volatility of the VND is obvious versus the US dollar is also lower than the volatility of the US dollar index generally. So I believe that the rise of the US dollar index will slow down over the next 12 months, along with the upcoming interest rate cuts by the Fed. And when the US dollar index slows down, it will significantly reduce the pressure on the Vietnam dong. And that time, I think the VND will be stable again. And then I would like to emphasize that in terms of foreign exchange flows, Vietnam has certain advantages over many regional countries. Every year we have a trade surplus of over 20 billion US dollar, along with disbursed FDI inflows of more than 20 billion US dollar, and then remittances of nearly 20 billion US dollar per year. These foreign currency inflows create a substantial buffer for the State Bank of Vietnam to intervene into the exchange rate during the periods when the US dollar index becomes too hot. So you can see over the past 10 years, the Vietnam dong has been one of the most resilient currencies in the region in terms of depreciation against the US dollar.
Right. Again, really good points, and thanks for enlightening us on this topic as well. Well, as we have discussed also in our previous interview, the pre-fund requirements for foreign investors were removed in Vietnam, and this change was crucial for Vietnam to get the emerging market status in the future. How do you see the timetable for FTSE giving the emerging market status to Vietnam, and what kind of actions are needed in order to get there?
You are right that recently Vietnam has issued Circular 68, in which it has officially removed the refunding requirement in November this year, and thus Vietnam has achieved one of the last two criteria needed for the FTSE upgrade for Vietnam to be upgraded to emerging market. At this point, I can say that the upgrade is coming very, very close. I would like to say one recent information. Recently, the representatives of FTSE Russell has visited Vietnam to assess the implementation after the removal of the pre-funding requirement. And the feedback from FTSE has been very positive. They highly appreciated the execution of Circular 68. They might need another 6 to 9 months to gather more feedback and more information from foreign investors about the removal of the pre-funding requirements before making an official decision. But they did share that the feedback so far from foreign investors are very, very promising. So from now until March next year, Vietnam only needs to address the final criterion, which is the method to handle the failed trades, if any of them occurs. So far, after 2 months of removing the pre-funding requirements, there have been no failed trades. However, I believe that establishing a method to settle the failed trades can be easier than removing the pre-funding requirements. And I think that the lawmakers and the securities companies will soon come up with some specific mechanism for fair trades in the next 2 months, even when they are not needed. So now with all the information available, I think FTSE Russell can be confident enough to upgrade Vietnam to emerging market by September next year.
Okay, that's really good to hear. Thanks for the update. And it sounds promising, and let's see what the status is in our next interview. Well, the Q3 earnings season ended quite recently, although we are almost reaching the end of the year. So, what kind of growth development and also earnings development do you see in the Vietnam stock market reaching this year, and what kind of other observations would you point out from the Q3?
I would say that Q3 was a very good quarter for the listed companies in Vietnam. The total net profit of all the companies in the VN Index has grown by 28% year on year in the third quarter. And our core holdings did even better with over 30% year on year growth. Among all the sectors in the Vietnam market, I would say that the retail sector, the consumer sector, and industrial sector did extremely well as they recover nicely from last year's low base. Most of the banks also did quite well in terms of earnings growth. And with all the macro indicators in October and November, they are showing very strong economic growth. I think the earnings recovery momentum will continue, and we're going to witness another strong quarter in terms of earnings growth in Q4 this year.
Okay, good to hear. Can't wait to see the results. Well, of course, every time I talk to PIN, I want to talk about bank stocks because you have a big weight of them in your portfolio. So, how has the bank stocks developed this year, and is the sector valuation still below historical levels? And if they are, why?
I would say that we have a very strong banks portfolio with some of the best managed banks in Vietnam. So in the first 9 months, most of our biggest bank position delivered 10 to over 40% year-on-year earnings growth. There are only two banks in our portfolio, OCB and VIB, with a combined less than 3% of weight in our portfolio. They had negative earnings growth in the first 9 months because this year they had to make some sizable provisions for some legacy assets. But putting that aside, even the CEO of OCB said this year is actually their best year, if not taking into account the one-off costs and the provisions. And those one-off costs will be gone next year. So we can expect a strong recovery next year for OCB. That was about the earnings. In terms of stock performance, I think most of our biggest banking positions also outperformed the VN index with gains of 20 to 45% year to date. And they had contributed largely into our fund's performance year to date. As for the reason why banking sector's valuation are still largely below historical levels, well, that's a good question, but I think the main reason was that the market sentiment has been very weak overall in the last 6 months. And as a result, a lot of stocks in other sectors are also trading well below the historical valuations, not just the banks. The banks are just the cheapest. So I think eventually investors will realize how cheap the Vietnam market currently is, and especially how cheap the banks are. So my expectation is that market sentiment will get better in 2025, and it is most likely we will see another nice banking rally in Q1 next year, as it has always happened during Q1 in the last 4 years.
Yeah, can't wait for the rally.
Yes.
Thank you for the update. Well, PYN Elite's portfolio, the value grew overall 18% during 2024, doing significantly better than the Vietnam Stock Index. So, what were the main drivers for beating the index, and what were the best performing stocks in your portfolio supporting this growth?
Thanks for the question, Sarah. Aside from the outperformance of our biggest banking stocks, which contributed largely into our portfolio performance, I would like to mention some other best performing stocks that also contributed to our performance, and that is a long list. The first one is ACV, the position which we accumulated during COVID. ACV has rallied 80% year to date, and now it accounts for 10% of our portfolio. The second is FPT, that is Vietnamese tech giant with an outstanding long-term growth story for next 10 years. We bought FPT in Q4 last year at very cheap valuations, and year to date, the stock has nearly doubled from our purchase price. The third one is CMG, another tech company which we just divested in November at substantial profit. CMG also rallied 30% year to date, and we sold CMG at the peak. And then there is Vietnam Airlines, which is another big position, and we accumulated Vietnam Airlines in summer this year, and we made 30% gain in only 6 months. Then most recently in November, we bought a substantial position in VCI by participating in their private placement at 20% discount. So we made 20% gain in immediately. And then aside from the names that I just mentioned, there is also a list of smaller positions, each one only around 2% of the portfolio, and which we accumulated in Q4 last year at cheap valuations, but then we divested them at up to 30% profit in only a few months, I think around summer or autumn. Those also contributed to our year-to-date performance.
Right, thank you. Really good to hear that you have had so many positive cases in your portfolio recently. Well, lastly, let's turn our looks to the upcoming year 2025, which is almost here already. So, what kind of expectations do you have for PYN Elite's portfolio companies for 2025?
I would say 2025 will be another big year in terms of earnings growth for all the companies in our portfolio. A lot of stocks in our portfolio are turnaround stocks, and their earnings recovery path is just at the beginning. Earnings will continue to recover more strongly in 2025, and that's what I'm sure of. So with those earnings growth and the fact that most of those stocks in our portfolio are trading at very cheap valuations, I think it's just a matter of time before their share prices take off to where they should be.
Good, great. These are good words and last words before we conclude the year 2024. Thank you so much, Lan, for this interview once again. I feel like every time I get to speak with you and ask you something, I learn something new about the Vietnam stock market. So thank you for that. And also, I wish you and the viewers a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.
It was great having an interview with you today, Sarah. And Christmas is coming, so I would like to take this chance to wish you and the audience of Inderes TV a Merry Christmas and an outstanding and Happy New Year 2025.